channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon, so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. Tonight I want to go ahead and put a capstone on a particular subject that's very important by addressing a group of people who are completely unimportant. Yes, we're talking about the tethers. I know that there's going to be those who will say that this follow-up is unnecessary, but I think that it is, because the most important part of communication is always clarity. And I feel that my earlier remarks from a little over a week ago were perhaps not clear. Obviously, we don't want a conflation of tether with immigrant family. They are two completely separate, different groups. The only thing that our black immigrant family and the tethers have in common is accidentally being born in the same geographical location. The problem comes in that the tethers cosplay as being us, but they began their career of hiding in sheep's clothing by pretending to be black immigrants who came to the U.S. with honorable intentions. The tethers are one of the main reasons why Africa and the Caribbean are in the shape they're in. They're the ones who did the most to utterly destroy the loyalty system that blacks outside the U.S. should have had and been able to rely upon. But why are we being so strident and aggressive about calling them out, some may ask? Well, when you have graffiti on the wall, you can't remove it with a feather duster. You gotta bring in a sandblaster. There's just no other way. If the tethers are going to be cast out, then they have to be cast out. And that will involve making sure that any others who are hoping to walk in their footsteps can't. The political and social pathways that they use have to be identified and dismantled so that nobody else can come along after them and duplicate their treachery. For the longest time, we tried to tiptoe around the issue, and all that did was allow more of these turncoats to come to the U.S. and begin bad-mouthing us and stabbing us in the back. It increased the political confusion. But understand that the tethers are the enemies not merely of foundational black Americans, but of all black people worldwide, whether you reside in the U.S. or not, whether you happen to be of our bloodline or not. We have a common enemy, one who's been betraying us since before the first white slavers showed up on the shores of Africa or the Americas. Now, the overwhelming majority of tethers came to the United States since the mid-1960s, when black Americans kicked open the door for them. And that being the case, it is impossible to talk about them without addressing the fact that they don't come from the United States. They came from abroad. Now, we also happen to have a lot of black folks who came from abroad, and they're not with the BS, and as a result, some of them may feel some kind of way when we address this issue because they also immigrated here. But let me tell you something. If the only thing you have in common with the tethers is that you both are immigrants, then you don't really have anything in common with them because you don't share a common mentality. And as I've always said, blackness is supposed to be more than just whether or not you got a requisite amount of melanin. It also comes down to your mentality. The tethers are and have always been fighting a war against black people worldwide. That being the case, they have to face opposition on all sides. Now, of course, you got a lot of the immigrant family who will say, these guys don't speak for us. While I don't doubt that that's true, it is true that they're not getting enough pushback yet either. As long as the tethers think that there's not enough black immigrants who are going to call out their off-code behavior and won't do it aggressively, then they are speaking for you. The tethers have to be shut down and shut up. It is the responsibility of everyone to make sure that nobody speaks for us except us. And that's why you see black Americans doing what we're doing. We realized it wasn't enough for us to just grumble amongst ourselves about what the tethers were doing. This was a problem that was allowed to fester for generations. It was on the tip of everyone's tongue, but nobody wanted to say it out of fear of fracturing some Pan-African unity that, truth be told, never existed. Can Pan-African unity become a reality? I think that it can. In fact, I think that it should. But not like this. We got a lot of house cleaning and a lot of repairs to do before that happy day can arrive. As Black Americans, we gave birth to an overarching definition of blackness, one that crossed all pre-existing lines. As a result, that made it possible for us to unify here. And Black people in the Caribbean, they only did it once in Haiti, and then it immediately fell apart afterwards. And as for Africa, Jamaica, and the rest of the islands, we have to put it bluntly, family, Black unity never happened in those places at all. The previous generations in the U.S. had a false assumption that all Black people worldwide were serious about Black empowerment like we are, but that just wasn't true. So it was this generation, starting with Generation X, continuing with the Millennials and Gen Z, who have gotten serious about finding out why these things never happened, and about separating ourselves from the people who don't want Black empowerment. As I've said for 15 years now, we have to take a hard-nosed approach to our power, and that's not going to please everyone, but power isn't about making everybody else happy. It's about getting what you need. So I want to be clear that if you happen to be a Black immigrant who just so happens to listen to my content and you consider yourself to be B1, then you need to also be calling out these tethers too. They are the enemies of all Black people who want empowerment. So we all have to be uncompromising about making it clear they're not with us. Any of us. In an earlier video, I had said that there's an uncomfortable conversation that has to do with immigration in general, and it strikes at the heart of why so many immigrants claim that they feel quote-unquote like they don't fit in. Immigration, especially transnational immigration, is the result of people who were trying to get out of the way of something. They were trying to run away from something. Well, why do people do that? Because there was some circumstance that came along and forced them to have to move. Now, where did they go? Usually to a place where there were people who were strong enough where they didn't have to flee. It's just a fact that when a group of people are trying to get away from a particular circumstance, they don't go and live in a place where the locals are also trying to leave. Now, where tethers are concerned, they all will break their necks to get into the United States. There's plenty of places around the world with higher standards of living than Africa or the Caribbean, places that are closer to them geographically, and that have immigration laws that are far more lenient. So why do they decide that they have to get to the U.S. or bust? Because the U.S. has a population of Black people who have made it where this is a place with the highest standard of living for Black people in the world because we made it that place. Also, these tethers tried to flee to Latin America, but as Coleman Cruz and others will attest, Latin America never had a civil rights movement, much less a Black power movement. So when you go down there, you run into all of that improve the race crap. And they made it clear it wasn't the white race that they thought needed improving. You have entire Black states down there in some of those areas, and yet they have less rights than we do because they failed to fight for them. Not trying to be messy, I'm trying to make a point. That's why so many of them deny being Black. They're still hoping that if they just deny being Black and claim, well, I had some conquistador in the family or some Portuguese, whatever the heck in the family way back in the day, they think that that's going to mean something to those anti-Black racists down there. They've been doing that for hundreds of years. They think that embracing the one or two Europeans that might have been in the family is somehow going to get the others to stop mistreating them. That's what the Coleman Cruzes and his ilk did. But instead of running from their problems, all they really did was to just learn how to suffer in silence. And that's why, having failed to take a stand in their homeland, they decided to take a walk instead. And they came here, because there was a group of Black people who never ran from anyone. We created a place where being Black actually means something, and whether anyone wants to hear it or not, that's something that the Africans and the Caribbeans did not create at home. That's why all of these people want to get here. Because it's the only place where Black people fought to establish some kind of rights. And we're still fighting to this very day. As Dr. John Henrik Clarke said, every generation must fight for their freedom. And that freedom is not secure until they make it secure. We've been fighting for 500 years because we recognize that our freedom has never been free. Compare that to the tether, on the other hand. He claims that he's already free because he thinks playing the part of the pet mascot for white power will get these racists to look kindly on him. And that's never worked. But then again, the tether's not willing to build, not even for himself. So how is the tether going to make their freedom secure? They wouldn't even fight for freedom at home. So when they come to the U.S., they think that it's our job to fight for their freedom. And for a while we did, until we saw that they weren't lifting a finger on their own behalf, and that they in fact have been actively fighting against us. And now what you see going on is us putting them on notice, we're not fighting for anything on their behalf. And that's the reason why it's necessary for us to have some sort of conversation about immigration, because when immigrants have to leave home, that messes with their confidence. A lot of them begin to think that the people in the places that they fled to must look at them as having failed, that they look at them as being weak, that they had to come take refuge among the strong, and that messes with people's sense of confidence and dignity, because they suspect that it might be true. The only way that you're supposed to leave home is if you do it like Muhammad did, and that's leave just long enough to raise an army to come back and take your homeland. That's why Zionism is such a powerful idea for so many Jews. After hundreds of years of being exiled from so many countries in Europe, they now had a movement that said that they would fight to control a piece of real estate. I'm not saying to agree with what's going on in Gaza or to agree with anything the Israelites have ever done. What I'm saying is to understand why even those who disagree with Zionism still appreciate and support the overall goal of maintaining the so-called Jewish state. Because to them it represents the first time since the Old Testament that they took a stand. And that's why even among Jews who don't necessarily support Zionism, the David Ben-Gurions and the Ariel Sharons, the Moshe Dayans, and even the Benjamin Netanyahus occupy a large part in their collective imaginations because of what they think these warmongers represent in terms of their own self-image. And this is all what's at the heart of why so many tethers hate foundational black Americans. Their having fled from home didn't mean much to us because we recognize white supremacy as a global enemy. But the tether looked at us as being the enemy. Our conditions in the U.S. has been far worse than anything in Africa or the Caribbean. But we didn't run. We didn't get on trains or boats to take us to Canada or Mexico. Oh, sure, you had some Negroes who were talking like that. But we know white supremacy is global. So no matter where we go to, we'd have to wage the same fight regardless. Our roots run deep in this land. So no matter how bad it gets, we're not running because we're tied to the soil. That's why we're called the black grass roots, because we're tied to the soil. Victory and defeat are not choices, but whether you fight or flee is. And the people who flee, well, they tend to have to do that a lot. Once one group of enemies puts you on the run, you better keep on your track shoes because everybody else will figure they can do the same thing to you too. Their calculation will be that if you didn't stand your ground in one place, then the chances are excellent you'll also run the next time someone pushes you around. Either you'll practice fighting for yourself or you'll practice running. And while people may feel pity for the tethers for a time, when they see that tethers only believe in running, that pity will eventually turn into contempt. The tether wants the honor and reputation and esteem that comes with having established a history and legacy of standing on one's own 2 feet. But that only happens when you stand on your own 2 feet. The tether thinks that boasting that they begged their way into a government loan or into a token job is going to be a substitute for the honor, reputation, and esteem that they're supposed to have. But it's not. They're charity cases at best. When the tether has to tell their story, they don't get to talk about what they built. They can't talk about any battles they won or deeds they accomplished. All they have is a sob story and a sad tale about either colonialism or a corrupt government or what have you. But what they don't have are any valiant stories of victory. Reputation is what precedes you into the room. And when a foundational black American comes into the room, everyone from Frederick Douglass to Dr. Claude Anderson precedes us. When the tether comes into the room, what reputation precedes them? What do people think about when a Coleman Cruz enters the room? What esteem does Candace Owens have? She doesn't even dare to mention the Caribbean where she's from because she can't point to any victories there, certainly none that she created. Notice that? As much as Candace Owens attacks black Americans, shouldn't she be lecturing us about what a paradise that she built down in the islands? Instead, Candace Owens fled, and she makes a living kissing white supremacists' behinds full time. Now, they may like the lies that she spouts, but no white supremacist has ever said that they respect Candace Owens, even before she began biting the hand that fed her. And notice how Candace Owens has never talked about the Caribbean as being a bastion of peace and prosperity, because it's not. All of the grimy, slimy stuff that she says about black Americans goes several times over for the place that she's from, and yet she doesn't mention that at all. She's trying to talk down about black Americans, but she doesn't have the ability to talk up about home. She claims to be so educated that she's more educated than the average black American. There's another talking point. But can anyone tell me of any prestigious university in the place that Candace Owens has come from? If some tether is going to try to claim that black Americans don't work hard, then I'm going to be looking at the places they came from to see whether or not these are bastions of industry and hard work. Or are these places basically very poor, and that they don't have any factories to speak of, certainly none that the locals made? If someone's going to be claiming that they're better educated than black Americans are, then the first thing I'm going to be doing is looking at their educational infrastructure. What kind of universities have they established? What kind of research institutions have they pioneered? If the only thing that they have is that they got a degree from someplace and they immediately got on the first thing smoking to the U.S., what that tells me is clearly their education didn't do them a whole lot of good, because as Dr. John Henrik Clarke explained, the entire reason that you educate the young is to teach them how to hold the state together. But if people get an education and their first move is to immediately leave home, that means they don't care about holding the state together. They don't even care about home. And this is why the Coleman Cruises and the Candace Owens and others, they decide that they're going to attack us full time, because they figure that if they talk trash about us enough, it will distract people from the fact that these tethers don't have any sort of wins at all. They can't point to anything and say, this we have done, because the tether only did one thing. They ran. So to our immigrant family from wherever it is that you hail, whether it be from the Caribbean, Africa, or anywhere else for that matter, you have a responsibility and obligation to stand up for yourselves, because if you don't, you're going to be letting these tethers be the face of your group, and you should never do that. It's time for black people worldwide to stand on our own 2 feet, speak with our own voice, and not allow these bootlicks and these clowns and meat puppets that white supremacy has propped up to try to palm themselves off as speaking for us. And that means any of us. It is not some victimless crime when the tethers are running their mouths and the people who come from the places that they do don't immediately slap them down. This gives the tethers room to operate. That's the lesson of the last 65 years in this country. As black Americans, we saw what the problems were, but we were hoping that these guys would grow out of it, that they would drop that nonsense, but they never did. In fact, they only got worse. We're refusing to allow the tethers to camouflage themselves and try to hide amongst us any longer. And with the black migrant family, we implore you to do the same. Don't let the tethers try to tie themselves to you. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Maurice Soul, Mark Anderson, Janitha Blue, Alice Ransom, and Kenneth Prescia. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.
The school ain't open yet. You was 12 years old. No problem. Little ninja. I see you, little crusty ninja. I see you, little crusty ninja. He said the school still ain't open. He was 12 years old. I see you, little crusty ninja. Why don't you shave that crust stash off the top of your lip too, little ninja? Shave that crust stash off the top of your lip, little ninja. Little crusty ass ninja. Talking about he was 12. Your whole family been through public school. Y'all ain't have a problem with it. Shut up. Always trying to go to war with King Kong. Little crusty ninja. Ogun. Cut a path. Somebody said, why Delaware? Another dumbass question. Because we found a school here. That's why Delaware. You little crusty. Shave that crust stash off your lip, homie. Stop dyeing your hair extra black. That hairline ain't coming back, ninja.
But Adams, you know, I'm gonna keep it a buck. Like, ever since this whole, I was hearing about this whole ADOS, from the minute I heard about it, it was like a division.
Yeah.
Amongst black people.
Yeah.
It was a division. It seemed like some sort of, well, you're not American or not. Like, what's your lineage? Like,
But Adams,
you know, I'm gonna keep it a buck. Like, ever since this whole, I was hearing about this whole ADOS, from the minute I heard about it, it was like a division.
yeah.
Amongst black people.
Yeah.
It was a division. It seemed like some sort of, well, you're not American or not. Like, what's your lineage?
What's this whole ADOS movement? And how how is that not something that's kind of divisive amongst people in this country? Like how do we decide who's who?
See what I'm saying?
Right.
How disrespectful they've been to them. Exactly.
Right, but then this is also, to
That's
me,
foul.
I see this as a divide and conquer thing. So now I'm supposed to give
Yes.
oh, word? That's what the Jamaicans are saying? Well, then fuck that. You know.
And on the list of tangibles, I would assume that that's where this ADOS comes in, because I'm thinking that certain people would hope that the tangibles, that the part of the tangibles would be reparations for the ADOS movement. Yes?
Yes.
Is that what I'm to believe? Now,
Not just that, but definitely number one on the list.
right.
I definitely subject when you're ready, Jay. I like to have them.
Yes, before you add on, I just would like to say now there's some that feel that this movement is quite divisive and just another way to divide black people.
Foundational black Americans, because over here in the North American continent, us foundational black Americans, we're the founders of the United States. There was no United States until foundational black Americans built it. So we are acknowledging our own designation. So that's not divisive, because other groups do this.
And I just feel like we need to come together as black people, you know what I mean, as much as possible. And it just feels like that type of thought, and I understand where you're coming from with it, but it feels like that type of thought helps to divide instead of bring us more together.
Okay, this is the problem, Lord Jamal. That division is caused by non-FBA. Foundational black Americans, we have been the only people fighting for everybody.
First of all, you know, there's a lot of divide and conquer with this. There's a lot of bullshit that goes into this talk of reparations. You know, as far as who gets it, and
Both of my parents, on both sides of the family, we can trace everything back to plantations in Alabama and North Carolina. So my family, 100% foundational black Americans. Nobody in my family immigrated.
How many people can do that, though, do you think?
We can. We can do that. Most of us can.
How many that are claiming to be can really do that? Keep it real.
You can trace your family lineage at least back to 1870. You can trace your family back to the 1870 census. If you know your mama and you know your daddy, their name has been documented somewhere. You know where to trace them.
Right.
So
a lot of them had just first names, though. You know what I mean? Like, I'm telling you, I physically, this is not no easy shit to do these traces. Like, I physically have been through this shit. Like, I've seen it. Like, I went down that rabbit hole for a second. And when you get to all of that slavery type of shit, like, the records are not what you think.
There's outliers to it, but generally, it's pretty easy to trace your lineage back to slavery, to a plantation. Or it's easy to trace your lineage back to at least the 1870 census. The average person who can trace their lineage back to 1870, 9 times out of 10, you came from a slave plantation, because they'll list you as a farm worker or domestic or something like that. So that means you came most likely from a slave plantation. And that's a little bit different from somebody who immigrated over, because you wouldn't be eligible for a reparations claim. We can't open up that door, and this is for several reasons. If we start letting African and Caribbean brothers start getting reparations based on the Jim Crow treatment, then what's going to happen? The damn white Hispanics are going to start saying, okay, well, damn it, I was mistreated too. And then it's going to undermine the reparations claim. We respect CARICOM. Over in the Caribbean, they have a reparations movement.
my thing is, there was a lot of suffering done by all of us at different times in America. I don't give a fuck if you got to America 5 years ago, from whatever fucking country. If you black, you gonna go through some you're gonna suffer some bullshit.
Let's just say we all get $2 million, you know, all black people that can prove it, that, you know, they have lineage here in these North America and they were slaves here and they get $2 million. What the fuck do you think these motherfuckers are gonna do with that money? Fuck. They just give the money right back. They just would give the money right back. Just like you get your taxes and all that tax time coming. Half of these motherfuckers giving that shit right back to the within 6 hours sometimes in the motherfucking black community. Needs to be running around with like the shit would be fucking crazy. Like, and all the guns and and Mercedes and blinged out, it would just be fuck. They just give the money right back. They just would give the money right back. Just like you get your taxes and all that tax time coming. Half of these motherfuckers giving that shit right back to the within 6 hours sometimes in the motherfucking black community. Needs to be running around with like the shit would be fucking crazy. Like, and all.
Are you Ados?
Here's the thing. On my father's side, no. Okay? We trace back to Guyana. Okay?
So you're Caribbean then?
South American, yes.
Oh, Guyana's not
it's
Caribbean?
a Caribbean, it's in South America, but it's considered Caribbean in a way.
Got it.
It's one of
because whenever I go
South
to
American countries.
the West Indian Day Parade, I think pretty sure I see Guyana flags flying around.
In South America.
Right.
Just like you might see Honduras or something like, but that's all in South America. So anyway, now my mother is adopted, so I don't know her. I still got to do some research on, you know what I mean? I actually discovered one side of her father. Now I got to trace where his family's from, but I did the trace on my father's side. So on that side, no, I'm not Ados. It's possible I'm on my mother's side I am. But see, again, that's some bullshit.
But anyway, who here in America are direct descendants of the slavery, and I'm assuming that that happened here on this land in America, and they're probably not even thinking about South America or anything like that. But let's just say they're isolating it to just here in just America. Well, now immediately they've isolated the South Americans.
You can trace your family lineage at least back to 1870. You can trace your family back to the 1870 census. If you know your mom and you know your daddy, their name has been documented somewhere. You know where to trace them.
Right.
So
a lot of them had just first names, though. You know what I mean? Like, I'm telling you, I physically, this is not no easy shit to do these traces. Like, I physically have been through this shit. Like, I've seen it. Like, I went down that rabbit hole for a second. And when you get to all of that slavery type of shit, like, the records are not what you.
Both of my parents, on both sides of the family, we can trace everything back to plantations in Alabama and North Carolina. So my family, 100% foundational Black Americans. Nobody in my family immigrated.
How many people can do that, though? Do you think?
We can. We can do that. Most of us can.
How many that are claiming to be can really do that? Keep it real.
You can trace your family lineage at least back to 1870. You can trace your family back to the 1870 census. If you know your mom and you know your daddy, their name has been documented somewhere. You know where to trace them.
Right.
So
a lot of them had just first names, though. You know what I mean? Like, I'm telling you, I physically, this is not no easy shit to do these traces. Like, I physically have been through this shit. Like, I've seen it. Like, I went down that rabbit hole for a second. And when you get to all of that slave,
there are outliers
shit to it.
There's outliers to it, but generally, it's pretty easy to trace your lineage back to slavery, to a plantation, or it's easy to trace your lineage back to at least the 1870 census. The average person who can trace their lineage back to 1870, 9 times out of 10, you came from a slave plantation because they'll list you as a farm worker or domestic or something like that. So that means you came most likely from a slave plantation. And that's a little bit different from somebody who immigrated over, because you wouldn't be eligible for a reparations claim.
It's my great-grandfather on my father's side that wasn't born here.
It's my great-grandfather on my father's side that wasn't born here.
How does one know that they're foundational American? I, a few years back, did a like an ancestral so I had just did on my father's side, right? But in doing all of this, and I'm going to tell you, it traced back to Guyana, right?
Okay, right.
So I had just did on my father's side, right? And I'm going to tell you, it traced back to Guyana.
We can trace back.
My family suffered from redlining and all that type of shit, because I know how you feel about like Jamaicans that come here right now, this generation, and they're able to get loans. My family didn't go through that. My family didn't get all that when they came here. We lived as regular black people. So let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that. That would not, if they came over and they immigrated, because your family came from immigrants. They immigrated over here, and you can
Ellis
that
Island.
Because your family came from immigrants. They immigrated over here, and you can Ellis Island.
Right.
I know the boat.
That's very different, because you can't get a reparations claim like that.
Because you can't get a reparations claim like that.
And it's very important to not mix it up.
But now keep in mind, this is just my father's side.
I understand that.
We all have two sides now. My mother's side, I ain't traced that yet.
Y'all would know who the southern side of her family was. So if y'all don't know, that means she's from the Caribbean. So if I can understand that you don't know your dad, that's one thing. And your mom didn't tell you where your grandmother was from? Your mom didn't say shit? She had to come from somewhere, either immigrated from another country or came from the South. If she's black, right? It's just find out where your parents are from and where your grandparents are from. Your grandmother, if you knew your grandmother has a birth certificate, brother. Look at the birth certificate and see where she was born. And then see what her mother and father's name was. It's on the birth certificate. And then see where they were born. You trace it back like that. And if you can go all the way back to the 1870 census, that make you a foundational black American. All you got to do is just trace the parents back. Okay, some of these folks, you don't know where your mama's really from. Okay, like my mom's from New York. We kind of lost, and then, okay. But folks, okay. I don't know how y'all don't be knowing where your mama from. And you don't know your mama's side of the family. At least I can understand the dad's side might be a little sketchy, but you don't know your mama's side of the family? See, that raises red flags. That raises a lot of red flags when folks don't be knowing what their mama's side of the family is. All right. That's weird.
And I feel like they want us to spend our energy on this conversation when we really need to be focusing our energy on more practical things.
So when are we going to get ready? We're just not going to be ready for it. And what are we going to do? We're going to blame white people for systemically oppressing us for generations. Yes. We're not even going to try it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We need to. I'm not saying.
I mean, I know, but you just made the point that
African Americans won't get a piece of that. Whereas when it was vice versa back in 2016, the Jamaicans were saying, hey, African Americans, we want a piece of that too, because we were all on the same boat and just got dropped off in different places.
Oh, really?
But do you see how the Jamaicans turned on it?
They're saying, African Americans, you don't get a piece of this. That's the talking.
But you see what I'm saying? How disrespectful they've been to them. Exactly.
Right, but then this is also, to me, I see this as a divide and conquer thing. So now I'm supposed to get oh, word? That's what the Jamaicans are saying? Well, then fuck that. You know, if they trying to keep it, then we're going to keep our shit to ourselves. See, that's the type of attitude that they want to inspire by having these fucking conversations right now so that we'll be fucking mad at the Jamaicans.
Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. There's been a lot of changes that have been happening on the political landscape. Some of them more subtle, but a lot of them very overt. But the biggest change that's taken place happens to be that you got black Americans who are actually demanding to be in charge of their own political affairs, and not have individuals who are pushed in front of them by the dominant society who we're told we have to choose from. Undoubtedly, the greatest sign of this seismic shift among the black electorate happens to be the fact that Barack Obama is getting taken to task, not by the white media, they love this guy, they invented this guy, but by black voters themselves, who are making it very clear that no, the Hillary Clinton defeat of 2016 wasn't some fluke. It was a direct response of the black electorate to 8 years of a do-nothing, nobody president who wasn't looking out for anyone except for himself. That's what the 2016 election was about. And the way that things are going, looks like we're primed to have a repeat of it this year. But what this says to us happens to be, this is the result of having a whole bunch of tethers who are in positions they shouldn't be in, like Barack Obama, the king of the tethers, Kamala Harris, who is fighting to be the queen, and Stephen Horsford. He's the current head of the Congressional Black Caucus. He himself is an immigrant. Go back on this YouTube channel into the archives and you'll see where I listed the members of the CBC who are new to the U.S. or at most first-generation immigrants. And this Horsford character, he's been going hard in the paint to legalize any and everyone regardless of whether they're illegal aliens or not. As far as he's concerned, there's no room for black empowerment, but there's going to be a lot of room for immigrant empowerment. Some of the Democratic shills are getting desperate, though, since they know that the black media is all about cutting through the rhetoric and talking points and finding out what the truth is. So when Kamala was presenting her so-called plan for black men, the first thing we did was point out how adamantly she declared that she won't do anything that only benefits black people. So that told us right off the bat her plan for black men had to be a fraud, because if there's one thing we know about Kamala Harris, about the only truthful thing she's ever said is she's not going to do anything for black people. So the plan was clearly a lift-all-boats fraud. That's what her plan for black men is. The same Democrat platform of policies that are going to be open to and hence benefiting everyone, and by doing so maintain the racial wealth gap. Kamala was just putting the phrase black men in the title as her cynical ploy to see if anyone would be dumb enough to believe her this time. The shills and plants, though, they've been claiming that this isn't true, that she's going to be doing things just for black men, and that's why we got to turn out before she even actually does them. Well, let's look at the Harris campaign platform and let's see if that's true. When you go to Kamala Harris's current presidential website, they've got an 82-page digital book that details Kamala's plans for America. And on page 51 of the PDF file, it talks about her plan to grow all small businesses in America. And it says that she plans to implement what she calls a small business expansion fund, which would give entrepreneurs low and zero interest loans. Yeah, that sounds a lot like that $1,025,000 loans to black entrepreneurs and others that she was talking about on her website. Remember that phrase, black entrepreneurs and others? Well, now you know who the others are. Everybody in America who's not black. That way the racial wealth gap has to be maintained at all costs. So for those of you shills and plants who are trying to tell us that Kamala Harris's proposal for $1,025,000 loans to black entrepreneurs, that was some sort of new idea, no it wasn't. It's just simply her giving a small bit of more detail to her small business expansion fund idea, which isn't much of an idea at all. I mean, she was telling everyone from the jump what the scam was. Now, another point that she was talking about was she said that she would support a regulatory framework for cryptocurrencies and other digital assets. Remember that phrase, other digital assets. So when black men invest, these assets are protected. Now, when you look at Harris's 82-page outline plan for America, it says that she will, quote, encourage innovative technologies like AI and digital assets while protecting our consumers and investors. So there's that phrase, digital assets again. She doesn't say crypto in this entire 82-page document. Notice that? That's deliberate. It's because the government's not exactly trying to prop up what's seen as a rival currency to the dollar, especially one whose entire branding is that it's unregulated. And yet in Kamala's website campaign book, it says that she will encourage digital assets while protecting consumers. So what that shows you is her whole idea about how she was going to be protecting black men's digital assets, this is just the same thing that she says she's going to do for everyone. Now, I'm not going to give a point-by-point breakdown about how all of those 5 or so points for black men that she had in her so-called plan are nothing more than a slight rewording of the general policies that she's got on her website altogether. I think the point is made. What Harris was feebly trying to present as being a well-thought-out proposal of bold, innovative ideas meant to empower black men is just Kamala Harris's basic plan, one that already existed long before her current black voter crisis. She's just taking the basic policies from her website, inserting the phrase black men at the front of each one of them, and then waiting to see who'll be gullible enough to actually think she's being sincere. So no matter what the shills, the plants, or these white media bootlicks may try to tell you, when Kamala Harris said she's not going to do anything that only benefits black people, that's exactly what she meant. Meanwhile, she's making sure to take care of everybody else by doing things that only benefit them. The U.S. has a ton of programs and money ready and waiting for immigrants to the U.S., legal or not. Things that black Americans have never had access to. This is how white supremacy engineers the leapfrogging of all these other groups over black Americans. As soon as they show up here, by whatever means, they immediately get housing on the government's dime, money for education, and all of it based on being immigrants. That's the qualification. And these immigrants, after having gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars in free U.S. money just handed to them, they turn to black Americans and say that fiction about how they came to the U.S. with no money and why they worked for an education and to start a business. All they actually did was fill out some forms. And in many cases, you got these government bureaucrats who fill out the forms for them. Regardless, the rest is done for them by the system. To be a tether is to also be a coward, which is why Barack Obama is half white, and yet he has not and would never go up to white voters, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, and wag his finger at them like he did at black men. He would never do that, because he's a coward. It's easy to wag your finger at the most powerless segment of the society, especially when you've already decided to do the mental math that these people don't make big donations to your campaigns anyway, so apparently they can't hurt you, because only money matters in a campaign, right? Problem with that line of thinking is, dollars can't vote. So your millionaire and billionaire friends, they only got one vote like everybody else. Their fortunes don't equate to 1 billion votes. Never have, never will. And Kamala Harris's benign neglect of the black community is coming back to bite her hard. She made sure that there was an Asian hate crime law passed while she's been in office for the last 4 years. Meanwhile, black Americans are the majority of hate crimes victims, and she's done nothing for us, hasn't even proposed an anti-black hate crime law. It's not in her plan for black men. It's not in her basic do-nothing plan for America. But then again, that's what she said. It's the only truthful thing she ever said. She wasn't going to do anything that only benefits black people. How did we get to this point? Dr. John Henrik Clarke said, show me a group's strongest trait, and on the flip side, I'll show you their weakest. Our greatest strength is that we survived the most brutal regime of racial oppression in human history. Nothing else even comes close to what we've endured. We, a small, brutally oppressed minority, managed to do what entire nations of black people in Africa and the Caribbean couldn't do, except for Haiti briefly. We survived by becoming united. We pioneered a definition of black, one that crossed all pre-existing lines. It didn't matter where your folks came from, it didn't matter what you believed. What mattered was we were all being oppressed by the same enemy. So we had to forge a new identity based on what we have in common. And that was so powerful. That is the crucial element that's been missing outside the U.S., be it in the Caribbean or be it in Africa. Over in those places, you still got people trying to be tribalized, trying to claim that their little group or their little enclave is better than everyone else, even at this late date. We, on the other hand, welcome and supported all black people, whether they were from here or from abroad. As long as you're black, that's what matters, because that's the tie that binds. That's what made our rise possible. However, there was a huge downside to the all-encompassing definition of black that we had pioneered, and that downside is the same unconditional acceptance and support that we gave to one another, the tethers would be able to exploit when they showed up. And because we did not oppose them, we set the stage for white power to put these bootlicks in high position, even in organizations that we're supposed to be running. We managed to establish a real loyalty system here. But the problem was that we assumed everyone was loyal to fighting white supremacy just because we were. And what we found out is that's not true at all. So what comes now is that we have to start decoupling ourselves from these tethers. The practice of making sure that real benefits accrue to our lineage will begin with us. That being the case, people should be wearing their lineage on their sleeve, literally if necessary. Now, of course, you're going to be having the individuals who have been eating off of white supremacy, placing them in positions over us, saying that we're being divisive. The reality is they were the ones who were being divisive. We're just making it official. The first benefit that is supposed to accrue to the lineage is being able to speak for your group and speak accurately to your group's interests, thinking and by choosing our own representatives. That's part of what we've been getting wrong. We got the entire voting process backwards. The way they're supposed to work is you're supposed to choose who the candidate is for yourself based on whether or not you found people who are willing to stand up for what's in your interest. From there, you go ahead and make sure that they get on the ballot. Then the final step is to vote. We've had it backwards. We've been voting first, then trying to figure out who the hell do we let get elected into office, and then we waste years trying to beg them, coerce them, plead with them, shame them, whatever, to do what they said they were going to do, or rather what they misled us and alluded that they would do, because they never actually say it. Just look at the examples that I cited for you earlier about how Kamala Harris's so-called plan for black men is nothing more than a pathetic rewording of her general plan for all of America. That's how these guys operate. They'll actually have the gall to say, why, this is a plan for black people, don't you know? And then they'll sit back and wait to see if you let your imagination fill in the gaps, because that's what happens when people get conned. The con man basically lets the mark con themselves. We've had enough of playing the fool for anyone, or for letting anybody bring fools amongst us. Some of us are slowly but surely starting to figure it out. It's like having a boat tied to a dock. If you want to be free to chart your own course, then you got no choice but to cut the tether loose. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Darnell Henderson, Jacques Hargett, Kenneth Johnson, Mark Stroud, and Sean. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.
Which is funny how almost every foreigner has something to say badly about African Americans. Even Africans sometimes have to say about African Americans, but then everybody comes to America trying to be African American.
I'm going to speak for my whole country. Love Jamaica. But I think quite a few Jamaicans think that you guys play the victim a lot. Like an outsider looking in, it's like, gosh, them complain about everything. Look how much opportunity them have. Look how them can work. Look how them can buy $1 burger. And them over there complain. And that is how I was preconditioned, if I'm being totally honest. They're like, Shante,
it makes sense.
Yeah, don't go over there and waste the opportunity. Don't go over there and start complaining. Work for your own, focus on that. So that's always been my mindset. We're so focused on just making it. I really want to emphasize that. But sometimes when you just are focused on, oh, you go eat, you know, think say somebody a touch you. You know, think say, you know, oh, I'm gonna have the right temperature. I'm hungry. What you gonna do? Like,
the way how African Americans prioritize blackness isn't necessarily the same way in which an immigrant would prioritize their blackness. So, you know how African Americans would say, oh, black writer, black creator, black artist, black lawyer, black doctor, black woman in STEM. No, when we come to this country, it's immigrant or nationality, maybe our careers next, and then whatever else comes after that. So immigrant, Jamaican, marketer, whatever else comes after that. The issue that you're having is we don't see ourselves as one of you. And the reason that we don't see ourselves as one of you is not because of blackness. We just see ourselves as an outsider.
The issue that you're having is we don't see ourselves as one of you. And the reason that we don't see ourselves as one of you is not because of blackness. We just see ourselves as an outsider.
So now let's move forward. So as an immigrant, I'm here in this country. What do I want to do? Put my best foot forward. What do my parents want to do? Put their best foot forward and give us the best opportunity they possibly can. Thank you, Lord, for my parents, because they did exactly that. But it's my turn as their child to hold the baton. And one thing I always say, my parents did not risk their lives to get to America for me to get involved in some political warfare. My parents did not risk their lives for me to get to America, for me to sit here fighting people all day. That makes absolutely no sense. And I think because you guys have never taken that level of a risk, you don't understand that level of responsibility and accountability. That's really the problem here. Because if you really risk your lives to have something, if you really risk your life to get something, you're not willing and ready to throw it away.
Just fully American. You're African American, bro. That's it. How was that see you in 30? That wasn't an insult. That was strictly, you're black. You're not Trinidadian. You're not Jamaican. You're not African. You're not, word. You're not Ghanaian. You're not Dominican. You're not Puerto Rican. You're not Cuban. You are American.
I farted so loud. Black Americans people, I don't like them because they take lots of drugs.
I have this tweet by McBeanie_, and they said African Americans are by far the worst representation of Black people. They are obnoxious, self-righteous assholes that make people's lives a living hell anywhere they go. And then she got like 390 likes.
Is she also Black?
No, I don't know what she was. Okay. This is what she said. Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That's really a lot of hate, I feel like. But like my mom would agree with that comment. She would agree with that post. She would say like, you know, lazy, like loud, rude, all the negative connotations.
That's interesting. So let's explore that.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
So,
but I also will say that like my parents definitely came over here with stereotypes about African Americans.
When Africans are immigrating to the United States, their idea of African Americans, like, take away modern times where we have like the internet and everything, it's coming from TV, right? Where they're just seeing these rappers and these music videos, and you're seeing these movies and TV shows with people shooting guns and like cussing.
Ignorance from our parents as well. Our parents say things to us in which, at least I can't speak for African Americans, but I know Africans, our parents say things to try to get us to stick with other Africans instead of branching out, and for that festered. So now it just lives on as we get older. So I agree with her in that aspect, but also another thing I feel like isn't talked about enough is the way our parents will talk about Black Americans. Because if we're being honest with ourselves, our parents are not respectful. They will say things to try to instill within us to divide away from them, but like being lazy or not as clean or stuff like that. And I feel like that also helps perpetuate the divide, which also needs to be acknowledged.
Okay, so growing up, I had this ideology from the media, from people around me, that African Americans were these ghetto, noisy, arrogant, aggressive, just criminal.
So I think this was the intent of my elders as they reminded me to stay away from akatas. Akata is a derogatory term for African Americans. I didn't understand why at the time, because I knew nothing about propaganda, media, or anything else we'll discuss today.
The illusion of inclusion is how in Black America, the American Black community, we've kind of been given this idea that, well, you're here now, you've arrived, you have 2 legs, 2 feet, you're just like white America, everybody's the same. But we haven't been included in any kind of major way. Integration never really happened. You know, when you look at the zoning laws, we were zoned out of communities, regardless of whether we had jobs, regardless of whether we were teachers or principals or good upstanding people, we were never included. And so that non-inclusion has had consequences in our lives in terms of, that's why we're so far behind in terms of wealth. It's not about whether or not we have a culture. There's nothing wrong with us as Black people that inclusion in terms of the wealth of this country wouldn't fix. And we've never been able to have the opportunity to have that or do that. What people don't understand, when we talk about redistributing, like we say redistribution of wealth, right? I remember back when Obama got in trouble for saying something as milquetoast as that. It was middle of the road, probably right of center president. What you have to understand is that there's always a transfer of wealth. Every time wealth goes into Capitol Hill, it's transferred. It goes in one direction or the other. People lobby for it. That's why they're there. So when you look at the cost, there's a very specific cost of slavery. There's a cost of redlining. There's a cost of Reconstruction. There's a cost that we bear, and we eat the cost of not being included. And we have to eat that going forward. So all of the failure is baked into our community, the lack of wealth, the lack of upward mobility. And what, the study that Dr. Sandy Darity did with Antonio Moore shows that education doesn't fix it. A job doesn't fix it. Poor white people have more wealth than black people with a better job. So none of these things fix it. The only way you make us wealthy as Black America, the only way you make us wealthy and fix that is to actually give the money that was taken in the first place. That exclusion has a cost. There's been a cost to that exclusion over time. Destroying black businesses, having the mob come in and do that. There's a cost. There's a cost to when we try to get power, having Southern whites say, well, no, we're going to just change the rules and not the federal government coming in here to protect us. Everything has a cost. And so what we really need for white America is you have to eat that cost. Like you have to make this sacrifice, and not just in an ethical way where you say, well, you feel that empathy in yourself. No, there has to be a cost in terms of what you're willing to pay in terms of your own life and what you get, because what you get is because of the failures all over here. So if the failure is all over here with Black America, then of course you want your life. And wanting your life makes you not an ethical person. Wanting that life while we suffer, and we suffer because the failure isn't spread around, that makes you not the ethical person that you probably think you are. I would like for white America to tell me if there's good news. Because so much of this rests on you. And like the realization that this happened, and it didn't just happen for one moment. We had convict leasing in this country well into the 1900s. We talked about the bodies we just found in Texas that were on a convict leasing farm, and the condition of those bodies where they just snatched black people up off the street to work in these camps. So when you look at that, you have to say that effectively slavery didn't end in this country to the 1900s. And you see where we are. And so my question to white America, in terms of your ethical responsibilities, are you willing to do what's necessary to give your black brothers and sisters in this country hope? I think reparations is necessary. There is no way, because see, what people don't understand is timing. So people say, well, you're past that now, right? Well, we really aren't, because our wealth level, when you look at the studies I've mentioned, our wealth level show that we really haven't moved past that. We really can't move because of timing. So all of these people ascended. Even when you look at the New Deal and how black people and black men didn't get any of the GI Bill. When you look at that, there was a window, and either you are a part of that window, and your kids are now a part of that window because they're connected to you, or they aren't. And so that window is no longer open. We're headed towards actually like almost a libertarian America, right? In terms of the cuts that we're seeing. So what you have to say is, if we're not in a window that allows black people to access what was accessed by white people during that era, then how do you make them whole? And the only way you make us whole at this point is to do a reparations movement. Now we can talk all day about how we do it, but there is no question that wealth has to be given, that we have to do reparations in this country. When we've done it for other groups, it doesn't seem to become a big deal until we talk about it in terms of talking about Black America. I think it's a big deal because it costs white people a lot, because a lot of these other groups were smaller groups. So even though the sin committed against us was much worse, 400 years and much more lasting, and you benefit from it because of all the cost, and you put the toxins in the nuclear plants and everything in our neighborhood because of all the zoning, so that you could have a good neighborhood. So we have an awful neighborhood so that you could have a good neighborhood that we weren't allowed into, and there was no integration. And even when you look at what's happening now, and it's not just the South, you see New York schools say, no, we don't want these black and brown kids in our schools. Even if we show you that this doesn't result in your school losing anything academically, you don't want that cost. And so until white America is willing to eat some of that cost itself and make some of that sacrifice and spread that pain around, I don't know how you do right by Black America. You can't do right by Black America by just having empathy. I wish white America could give me a lot more hope than I have. That's what I would say. The hope that I have for white America is what I have seen with Dr. Cosby. That's the hope that I have. But this is a microcosm. I've seen Dr. Cosby meeting with white people in the Christian faith, evangelicals, reading books about things that they did not understand beforehand. I see them moving in a direction with Empowerment West and what they're doing that I never thought possible. Right, in terms of just like being able to, they've read books on blacks and black radicalism, and just educating themselves, because you have to educate yourself to put yourself in that position. And so what you have with white America a lot of the time is you have white Americans who have been in schools that intentionally kind of don't talk about slavery or make slaves into immigrant workers, right? And so I see this kind of re-education as a good thing, but you have to have somebody like Dr. Cosby an American DOS person in a leadership position. So the question I will ask evangelicals is, are you willing to let us lead this conversation in terms of what has to happen? And are you willing to listen? Are you willing to listen, be there, be cooperative, and even be, like I said, be led by us?